Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our Let's Talk sessions for a new autumn and winter season. It's great to have your company. My name's Donna Stevenson, and I'm part of the NoraBox family, and I'm your host for these wonderful conversations. Before we get started, then, just a little description about me. I've got shoulder length brown hair, and I'm wearing a wonderful grey NoraBox t shirt. And as I say, it's great to have your company for this conversation. We've got another fantastic guest. It's Armelle McGeachie. Armelle, welcome to you. I'm just going to give you a brief introduction and then I want to get to chatting because we've got a really interesting conversation on this Let's Talk. It's about masking, something that I think is very close to both of our hearts for a variety of reasons. So, Armelle, you are the founder of Girls with Dyslexia, and I think you might be going to talk a little bit about that during our conversation today. You're a keynote speaker, and I've heard you speak a number of times. You are exceptional. But you're also EMEA outbound specialist at Splunk. So that's your professional role as well. I hope I've said that correctly. Thank you so much for your company. Armelle, before we get started, I don't know if you want to say a little bit about yourself for our listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so thanks, Nora, for that really good introduction. So, yeah, I have dyslexia, dyspraxia. I work a full-time job. I do Girls with Dyslexia on the side. It's Instagram. It's bled into LinkedIn and TikTok, just spreading content that shows awareness around neurodiversity, looks to empower, looks to shed light on things that maybe aren't as touched on. And I have long brown hair and I've got a stripy blue and white top and a very cozy wool grey cardigan on.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you, Armelle. And that really sets the scene for what we're going to talk about because we're going to talk about masking. And I found a really interesting statistic and quite a sad statistic, actually. We guesstimate that about 2/3 of our neurodivergent professional adults are masking within the workplace. And, you know, I guess one of the reasons we want to do these conversations here at NoraBox is to have these conversations around these key issues. Now, just for those of you listening, as we start to chat with Armelle, we just want to make sure that you're aware. We think some of the conversation we're going to cover today may be triggering for some of you because we know that masking is something really personal and can be an issue that's quite emotional, isn't it, Armelle, for our community, really? Which starts us off by, if I may ask you then, in this context, Armelle, what does masking actually mean? Can you explain it to us, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's concealing and suppressing your neurodivergent traits in order to fit into societal norms. So this is really common in certain environments like school or university or the workplace where a lot of the time they have stricter rules on what is and isn't acceptable, but it can also occur in day-to-day settings like hanging out with our friends, going to the supermarket, running errands. And it happens a lot when we are feeling very insecure about how we present ourselves, typically when we're surrounded by neurotypical people, neurotypical norms, and we feel, you know, the pressure of the expectations surrounding us. And there's been a lot of discourse over the last few years about, you know, what is and isn't professional, and lots of people in this space have been doing a really good job at kind of dismantling exactly what it means to be professional. And traditionally, it used to be what is professional is how you would present, how you would act. And now it's changed to be a lot of around how you act as opposed to who you are, which I think is a really good way of looking at it because it makes places a lot more inclusive.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I guess in a very shorthand way, we're talking about people hiding of themselves in some way, isn't it? So with that in mind, how do you think masking can manifest in neurodivergent individuals?
Yeah, it ultimately manifests in environments that we naturally feel more uncomfortable in, and it could mean that we deny our stims, we maintain eye contact for uncomfortable periods, or we simply refrain from talking because we fear judgment, or we fear that our personalities will show and people won't like that side of us. For me, my brain goes into overdrive because of my dyslexia. I have low processing capability, so I know that if I'm in a group setting, group situation, I often get labelled as, you know, the last one to get the joke, or people treat my word recall challenges as nerves in themselves. So then I get treated in a certain way that I don't portray myself or want to be treated, in that, you know, I give out certain signals. For example, like if my word recall challenges, that comes out as nervousness, so people treat me as if I'm nervous. And it's about having the element of control in a way in a situation, and it's a way of demonstrating certain attributes maybe that neurotypical people or other people expect from us. And it can be quite incredibly taxing to mask because we're concealing so much.
I think what you shared there about how taxing it is ties in certainly with when I've spoken to individuals who've been brave enough to share that they've been masking, often for many, many years. And for whatever reason, they've decided to start to try to take that mask off. It's the idea that it's actually really exhausting, Armelle, to mask. If you don't mind, and I know you've offered to be very brave yourself, very honest during these conversations, and we appreciate that. How does that manifest, that exhaustion, that taxingness that you talked about when you've been masking all day?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting question. So I was late diagnosed. So up until I was 21, I didn't know that I had any sort of neurodivergent traits. I really internalized it, and what I truly felt that made me, it was one of the components actually that made me feel like I was neurodivergent leading on to dyslexia and dyspraxia, was my brain would go into overdrive at school, and I would feel like I'm overthinking absolutely everything, every interaction, during and after. And as soon as I got home, I could then act myself. So I would put down my school bag, but then I'd feel like I'm putting down my mental school brain as well. And it really is a sense of relief when you get into an environment after masking for so long, and you feel that sense of relief kind of flooding out of you, and you can just be yourself. But then it's weird because it's not a sense of euphoricness, because you know that you've got to do it all again the next day. So it can be quite challenging, especially if you don't fully recognize your own neurodivergent traits as well, and understand what triggers your masking, and what behavior you exhibit when you are masking as well. So it can be quite cloudy, but having that sense of relief is, I guess, the first step into knowing that you have been masking, and it's about dissecting that from there on in.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Thank you. You know, these are kind of, I suppose, newer conversations that we're having in these years around masking and decompression almost. Is that the right word, Armelle? You know, if you go to your safe space, wherever that is for you, with hopefully some people that you really trust in your life as well, where you can take that mask off. I suppose it's this new idea now that we're all catching up with about, you know, the impact that that has on us. I know I've spoke to many people who talk about being just absolutely exhausted, physically almost exhausted after a working day, or, you know, a school day as well. For folks who are listening to this, who are masking. I've had lots of people over the years who've said to me, I've realised I'm masking. I've started the journey now to try and remove that mask, and be really my authentic self. Are there any, I suppose, tips, and maybe that's maybe a too flippant a word, but are there any ideas that you can share with those of us who are listening who think, yeah, actually, maybe it's time for me now to start to think how I'm going to take this mask off and be my authentic self in each part of my life?
Yeah, we've largely talked about environment, and I think that plays a huge factor in the journey to unmasking. Not only with maybe the structure of school or workplace, but as you've mentioned, when people go to their safe space, they can suddenly decompress, they can feel themselves. So I think environment plays a large portion in how we see masking and how we actually mask, individually. So a tip I would give is try to understand which environments are most triggering for your masking. And then from there, maybe open a conversation with a close friend or people in the neurodivergent space. Community is absolutely a key component of my journey to embracing neurodiversity and understanding it fully. It's also important for anyone going through uncertainty with it to know that you can and should go at your own pace, a pace that's comfortable for you, to learn what sort of masking you can, I guess, prevents you from being your true self. So what is it about it that makes you so exhausted? Is it the actual act of masking, or is it that you're restricting your true self? And I think for me, that's where a lot of the overthinking came from. It's the masking, whilst in the moment it was protecting me. Whenever I would go home and reflect on the day, I think I'm restricting myself in a certain way because I can't be my authentic self. I feel like I'm not communicating on the same level because I'm being this kind of pretend person. I'm giving you different signals that aren't me, and it's really difficult to keep up. But then that's where a lot of neurodivergent people feel like they're a little bit lost in a way, because they feel like they need to mask in order to protect themselves, but then the mask in itself is so exhausting that it just ends up spiraling. And that's where a lot of the insecurities, I think, come from, or the hurdles and the challenges that a lot of neurodivergent people face.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, isn't it? Somebody had said to me a while ago when we were talking about this, and they were talking to me about the fact that they mask. It's this is their words, a horrible security blanket. And I thought, isn't that a really interesting way of explaining it? So they were talking about that masking, that security blanket's almost their default sometimes when they're in uncertain situations or situations they find really tricky. But it's like there's a a horribleness to it, almost a kind of a horrible legacy it leaves behind of feeling then that you have maybe let yourself down in some way.
Yeah.
How important do you think it is then, Armelle? Bearing in mind, I said these are kind of newer conversations now that we're having these days, happily. We're starting to talk more openly about these issues. How important is it then, do you think, if we feel that we can, that we're honest and saying to colleagues, hey, I'm going to try and start to take the mask off. Bear with me for a while because I'm trying to figure out who I am in terms of, who I am at work, and be my authentic self. Do you think if we feel brave enough and honest enough to do that, that's, you talked about community, that's a good part of making connections to say, I'm really working hard to take this mask off now?
Yeah, I think that's a really good and interesting point, and I think that's part of the journey that people need to take, is trusting in other people, because if you confide in the people that you trust, and whether they're neurotypical or neurodivergent, if you trust them and you can have an open conversation with them, that's the first step to ultimately showing your true authentic self amongst people that you don't know, that you don't have that certain relationship with. Because when we're in a workplace setting, I think that's, we're working every day with people that we consider acquaintances, and we know a little bit about them, but not to the same extent that we would, a best friend, or maybe the neurodivergent safe spaces, for example. So I think that's one of the first steps. And then always having that to fall back to as well. If we're talking about experiences that have happened, we bond, and we want to connect through the experiences that we have, and know that we're not alone with that. And sometimes in the workplace, it can feel quite isolating when something happens to you. And a part of processing at the end of the day, especially for me, is sharing it with someone. Because I know that if the thought lingers in my mind for too long, that's when I start to get the feelings of isolation and insecurity. So it really helps me offload whatever happened that day. And even if that person can't relate, but I can trust them, it's just a nice way to end that day.
Yeah, real wise words there. I'm wondering then, on the back of what you're sharing here, for employers who maybe don't know a lot about this stuff, but really want to find out more about how to support neurodivergent individuals. What could they start to put in place, Armelle, to encourage their employees to bring themselves to work? We talk a lot now, bring your whole self to work, be your authentic self. This is the opposite of masking, isn't it? It's about keeping it real and being who you really are. What can an employer do to try and encourage their employees to bring their whole selves to work in that way?
Yeah, absolutely. Really good question. First and foremost, I think having workplace communities of neurodivergent people, whether that is peer-to-peer support, whether it's set up from top down, having that safe space for neurodivergent people to speak with other people within the organization, somewhere where, they have the structure and the organization in common to talk about certain things, to share articles about maybe what they've learned, and opening up the neurodivergent space to include the workplace makes part of the workplace feel like a safe space. So that's definitely something that employers can do. I have also seen employers spread awareness throughout their entire organization, particularly when we look at certain neurodiversity months, like autism awareness, dyslexia awareness, certain months. Add that into your HR and people agenda. Make sure that you bring in people who have neurodivergent conditions, or they have the experience to be able to talk about certain neurodivergent traits, and really spread awareness, and actually add these specific nuanced conversations into it. So for one, it's really good to simply say, this is what autism is, this is what ADHD is, this is what dyslexia is, but bring in the conversations around people, with these neurodiversities could be experiencing X, they could be experiencing Y. This is what you need to do if someone approaches you and confides in you and says that they've got autism, for example, and really introduce that prescriptive, descriptive education and awareness, as well as the basics. I think is really, really important. And speak separately to your neurodivergent employees, because ultimately it's around, and we've mentioned these words, it's about openness, transparency and trust. A lot of companies benefit from having this in their culture, not just to neurodivergent people, but also to neurotypical people as well. And having that blanket culture makes it seem like neurodivergent people aren't an us and them. They're all in this together. Everyone experiences the open communication, the transparency, the trust. And I also think it's important to recognize that for neurotypical people, when we're looking at communication throughout the workday, there's often a linear structure to socializing and having a conversation and having meetings. It's very much like input X results in input Y. And for neurodivergent people, this isn't something we necessarily respond to in the same way. So employers need to show that they trust their employees, to have the best intentions and to show the best results, even when the input looks different. So ultimately, I guess to close off this section, it's all about creating a culture of bringing your best self to work and encouraging all employees to have a level of understanding that neurodivergent people are still going to get the work done. It's just going to be in a different way, to a different timeline. So it's really about focusing on the output and not really caring what the input looks like, or supporting different ways that people contribute to things, which ultimately helps neurodivergent people.
Yeah, brilliant. It's that very people-centered approach, I think,
Yeah.
isn't it, Armelle? I love what you say about culture, because that's something I'm absolutely passionate about when I'm out and about delivering training. With that in mind, then, all that words of wisdom that you've been sharing for employers, and there's a lot of good stuff there for people to listen to and try and figure out the right way through for them. Words of wisdom then, Armelle, please, for people, neurodivergent folks themselves who are thinking, yeah, maybe now is the time I want to be my authentic self and I don't want to mask anymore. So what messages of hope would you like to share with our community?
Yeah. I know what it feels like to not have all the answers, and it's isolating, and it can feel like a very confusing time. But one piece of advice I would give, and it takes a journey in itself to come to it and believe in it, but it's not knowing all the answers is okay. It's fine to have a few unknown excuse me, it's fine to have a few unknown aspects, and definitely it's something that a lot of neurodivergent people do. It's wanting to understand every single aspect of themselves and every single aspect of their neurodivergent traits, and to verbalize in a specific way and to know exactly how you operate. But it's fine to not know. It's fine to know that it's fine to naturally, I guess, go through interactions and go through life in a way, not knowing all the answers, and knowing that's okay. Because you find the answers through different life events. So you find the answers through community, and you find the answers through really good friends and really good support networks and coaching. So all of these different things come together to really help you learn about yourself. So not everything has to come from within you. You're not alone in this. It's okay to not know the answers, but it's also okay to branch out to other places, and the answers will come from other aspects in your life. They won't necessarily come from within you all at once, which is definitely when I was diagnosed at the age of 21. I suddenly thought all the answers would come to me, because I felt even more lost, because I knew I knew that I was dyslexic and dyspraxic, and I thought that would be enough. And then I suddenly thought, I have no idea how it presents in me. I have no idea how I come across to other people. I have no idea how to get from A to B to C to get good grades. And it's about slowing down that process and letting the answers come to you through exposing yourself to, as I mentioned, communities, people, support networks, and it will come to you in time. And once it comes to you, despite, it doesn't matter how long it takes for it to come to you, as soon as it comes to you, you suddenly have a newfound appreciation for that journey.
Wow. Armelle, you've blown me away with that answer. Yeah. So, do you know, I was not expecting you to say that. Everything you said, it just resonates with me.
Yeah.
I'm thinking then that I love what you say. It's almost being kind to yourself and just letting it come slowly. And you were, as I say, we're very grateful you sharing your own experience in that way. I guess when we are identified as neurodivergent, like you say, you expect everything, then, you know, that's the answer and everything will come to you. But I suppose it's about being patient. It is that gentleness, I guess, with yourself.
Yeah.
And what we hope is that you have around you a safe space, and that, you know, a understanding, wise employer and so on, so that you can go on that journey, you know, yourself and with others. Bearing in mind everything you said, and I love what you say, community, that's come through a lot during this conversation. You're happy for people to reach out to you, aren't you, on the back of this?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
People
LinkedIn,
finding you on
Instagram.
LinkedIn and so on. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. We appreciate that. And you have the same sentiment for everybody listening about reaching out to us here at NeuroBox. This is an ongoing conversation, I think, isn't it, Armelle? This is a let's talk where we don't have a very prescriptive answer. We've got lots of ideas about how we can start to figure out, you know, not to mask anymore and be our authentic selves. I don't know, with that in mind, if you've got any parting words as we say goodbye to our listeners during this session.
Yeah, I guess final words for me is really listen to yourself. Don't be influenced by other people's journeys too much, that it distances yourself from learning about yourself the way that you need to go about it. Go at your own pace. There is no right or wrong way to do anything. Just listen to what makes you feel comfortable and stick with that.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, I can think of no better message to end this session on. It's been a great conversation, so thank you again, Armelle, and thank you everyone for your company. What a way to start our new season as we return with Let's Talk, and we really look forward to welcoming you back next time around when we have another fantastic guest and another brilliant, insightful conversation. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.